In order to attract research funding to our academic medical center and to our medical school, we have to first recruit the best and brightest physicians and scientists. Then we need to support those individuals with state-of-the-art facilities and with funding that allows them to get started, that allows them to do some early experiments and generate data that gives the investigator the ability to determine what is the most promising approach to answering a question or dealing with a particular problem. HW generously provided to me, on behalf of MCW, a grant of $5 million that originally was planned for a 5-year time period. That grant will be extended a bit because of the pandemic. The grant happened to be hit by the pandemic in the early years, and so HW has fortunately given us an extension in order to use the money for the best possible purposes. Once we had our research strategic plan mapped out, we needed to work on it from several different points of view. Part of our funding is in a bucket that I might call the formation of collaborative teams. We realize that some of the most important and complex health and medical problems are best addressed by a team of investigators, not solely by a single investigator working on their own. Therefore, we have provided funding to groups of investigators, groups that are usually made up of 3, 4, or 5 principal investigators who work together to ensure that they are addressing complicated problems in ways that are diverse and that will bring together a diversity of viewpoints in order to come up with the best solutions.
My research is actually part of a large team of investigators here at MCW, and what we've been studying for the last 4 or 5 years, which has led to a major grant submission just this week, has been the regulation of blood pressure and cardiometabolic regulation, which has relevance to both animals and people. When we are trying to study the normal brain circuits which control these processes, and by understanding these brain circuits, we hope to understand what goes wrong when we have a rise in blood pressure causing hypertension or high blood pressure, or we have abnormalities in cardiometabolic balance that lead to decreases or changes in resting metabolic rate, which can have profound effects on body weight regulation. So the reason why the research is important is that about 50% of Americans have hypertension. There is a huge obesity epidemic, particularly in this country, but in most Western societies as well. And both hypertension and obesity cause increased risk for many cardiovascular diseases and are very strong risk factors for heart disease, heart attack, and stroke, which can cause mortality and morbidity. So the research tries to understand the fundamental mechanisms which control these processes under normal conditions and what goes awry when the systems become dysregulated and non-functional and lead to hypertension or decrease in resting metabolic rate. The reason why our projects require this multidisciplinary approach, let me give you an example of why that's the case. So in my project, this is a multi-project grant that we put in. In my project, we're trying to understand how the receptor for angiotensin II signals within certain neurons and then leads to outputs which would increase salt intake or fluid intake or enhance blood pressure or enhance sympathetic nerve activity and so forth. So I have the expertise in genetics and the development of the animal models, but in looking at the consequences of our genetic manipulations, we need to study them at the physiological level. So we have physiologists who help us measure the blood pressure, and we have electrophysiologists who help us look at what's happening at the cellular level and measure nerve outputs. And then we even have behavioral scientists who help us understand some of the behaviors involved in fluid intake. And this is very pervasive throughout the program. We also have a human study that's proposed in the project involving the neonatologist that I mentioned. So that requires many different types of expertise. So we have a very diverse team of investigators in terms of expertise. The program involves 7 or 8 different faculty that are present in the Department of Physiology and the Department of Pediatrics, and a larger team of research scientists and research technicians, probably numbering about a dozen. So we started conceiving the program about 4 years ago. And it took us 2 years to develop the ideas and the concepts and the specific aims and the hypotheses among this program. And that's what led to the 2021 application to AHW to support this research. And then since then, it's taken another 1.5 years. So it's really taken 3.5 to 4 years to develop the concepts. So, about 4 years of work has led to the submission of an NIH program project grant, is what they're called, a PO1 grant, submitted directly to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. And it was due in January of 2023 and has since been submitted. The funding of this grant by AHW was really a spark to move this research forward. And so what it did is it enabled us to hire a research technician who developed preliminary data for all 4 of the projects. It also allowed us to buy some equipment that was needed, some specialized equipment that was needed to measure blood pressure, respiratory function, metabolic rate in our animal models, and also funded a variety of basic research supplies along the way. It certainly shortened the time from which we had the conception of this research to being able to apply to the NIH for this program project grant, and probably shortened that time by a year or 2. The research funding is going to enable us to do the actual research over the next 5 years and to continue what was started by the AHW grant, and will facilitate the development of brand new knowledge which will help us to understand blood pressure regulation and what goes wrong and causes hypertension. And with that knowledge, we'll be able to facilitate the development of both treatments and potentially preventative measures. So, this will have wide-ranging beneficial effects for the residents of southeastern Wisconsin, which is, our area of interest, but also have wide-ranging interest to people in all communities across the United States.